Now, I just want to shift gears slightly, stepping back to consider the broader landscape of resilience planning in periods of immense change. And to do that, I'd like to bring in the perspective of a luxury automaker, Aston Martin, whose low volume production depends on a highly complex supply chain, rich in bespoke options and custom materials, and therefore inherently fragile. And back in March, we spoke with Martin Corner, Aston Martin's head of supply chain and logistics, who shared why one of his top priorities this year was to improve planning and coordination to prevent crises before they happened. He had just introduced a formal S&OP process at the company for the first time. It definitely represented a significant cultural shift within the company, moving from a largely reactive boutique style of decision making to a more disciplined, data-driven operating model that aligns sales, production, and supply chain. And here's just a small segment of Martin sharing that with us.
And one of the things that you've done to like stabilize the supply chain and start to build the function is to implement a sales and operation planning, S&OP function. Can you tell a little bit about what was particularly important about that and what impacts you've seen from implementing it?
Yeah, I mean, the critical thing, as we know with sales and operations planning, is to create a decision-making process that's one version of the truth and end-to-end across the company. So when we started at Aston, again, it was still acting like a sort of boutique business, and production had to run production, supply chain had to get the parts in and distribute the cars. But really the commercial side of things, there were decisions being made by the CEO at the time, directly with the chief commercial officer. And of course that was creating big fluctuations. And sometimes, I guess the company was being curveballed by, if you have certain stock building in certain markets and you're not tracking that, then you end up doing a huge correction rather than a adaptive rolling correction on a monthly basis to balance supply and demand. So we focused a lot in the first year or so on, let's call it the sales and operations execution part of it, putting the controls in place. We were planning at car level, and without any of the features or take rates built into the modeling. So I know in the plenary session yesterday we gave an example of the harnesses where 56 harnesses on a model where you're making 10 cars a day or 30 or 40 a week, you can very easily get that wrong. So we first built up the controls in terms of planning at car and feature level, sticking to sequence, that then stabilized production. And this year, with the new CEO being in place, we've actually put in the end-to-end supply chain process. Monthly cycle starts with a demand meeting with sales and ends with the combined S&OP group, which is supply chain, sales and finance, making the proposal for the next 18-month rolling forecast. So it's in its early days, but that's built up on data, transparent information on stock levels in the market, retail trajectory trends. So it's gone from being, I'd say, a production-based focus to an end-to-end process. So data's the key to it, and transparency.
Now, I'm thrilled to say that Martin is here with us live to delve deeper into how 2025 unfolded for Aston Martin and what lessons he's taking into the future with him. So, Martin, welcome. It's great to have you with us. You saw yourself there front and center, kind of talking about, that cross-functional decision-making and how it's really, really important to, have that supply chain team firmly at the table. And I just kind of want to kick us off our discussion and ask, now that you've really lived through 2025, there's been so much happening this year, not in just the kind of finished vehicle side that I just kind of gave there, but what does your story at 2025 for 2025 look like for your supply chain now, kind of 9 months on from your red sofa?
Yeah, well, partly 9 months on is quite incredible. It feels like a lifetime ago, and yesterday at the same time. Who would have known that when we thought we were going to have a nice stable planning process, things like the tariffs would kick in, the Chinese market would continue to be very difficult, I would say, particularly for the ultra-luxury brands. And from a planning perspective, having watched that, whilst we have been running the S&OP process, I think the the volatility in our business planning has been very high. Allied with, we've had a very exciting but challenging launch of the supercar Valhalla at the end of the year, which it might be relatively small in volume, but very high in complexity. So in a way, it's I think it's been another very difficult year. At the same time, I guess the backdrop is the first tier supply base in automotive continues to be in a difficult situation. I think many tier ones or tier N suppliers have a lot of financial challenges. So I think navigating those issues and the volatility related to that has also been quite tricky. I mean, going back to the S&OP process, so one of the good things I would say that's come from it is we're flowing now next year's business plan plus a look onto an 18-month horizon means I think we've got the most joined up forward plan that we've had with, let's face it, S&OP is 4 or 5 key elements, isn't it? It's retail sales, dealer stock levels, wholesale, company stock levels, and production, ultimately, with are you capacitized in the supply base in your factories to do it? I think for the first time, we've got a very joined up plan that's a forward plan that is on a rolling basis. And I think that's a massive step forward. And we're joining the dots between the fiscal years in a way that gives, hopefully, our supply base something that's realistic to work to, and also a more realistic curve from a volume perspective. So, yeah, it's been a tough year, actually. That we were hoping for a smoother year, but of course, the external world, you can't control that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I guess one of the positives of that, though, is you do have that 18-month plan, forward plan come out from this. And actually talking to quite a lot of kind of the supply chain experts on site at our events previously, especially we just came back from an event in Mexico in November, is that, you know, while all this volatility has been going on, you're really having to forward plan in the moment, in real time. So it's kind of someone said to me that, you know, we're actually revisiting things that you really want to have a look at because it is the urgent thing. So even though it's been a challenging year, hopefully there are still positives out of it of, you know, how do we forward plan and how do we forward plan better. But I want to get your take a little bit on definitely on how you're continuing to use that supply chain management function within Aston Martin to really help orchestrate that decision making at Aston Martin, because I know that's a really big kind of direction for you going forward.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think, you know, it's a passion of mine, but it's hard work because we're still working on rudimentary tools and processes. I think, like I said in that Red Sofa interview, facts and data is fundamentally my philosophy. And I think from the orchestration perspective, we've been focusing on the basics of better forecasts, managing and controlling the plans and the capacities with the suppliers, but taking it to the next level. I think the volatility, again, has curveballed us. We've had to make, this is in the public domain because we've released our quarterly results, another 2 or 3 big adjustments to our plan. So the issue with that is you end up spending a lot of time recutting the plan and working on the finances rather than working on the business improvement activities. But from an orchestration perspective, I would say the critical thing we need to focus on next is the order to delivery visibility and that full end-to-end view of what is our customer promise, how do we optimize cash and profit versus demand. And what that means is to all of our markets, understanding the lead times, understanding the customer promise. And we're building that up again from scratch almost. We're doing a value stream mapping of all of the flows. And I'm sure for people who work in some of the bigger OEMs who've got all this systemized already, it sounds a bit basic. But the important thing is, if we really want to manage our supply base from demanding parts from the suppliers to delivering cars to the customer with a certain customer promise, that end-to-end understanding of the lead times from start to finish is really important. And that in the end will help steer some of the other things like long-term supplier footprint, managing the end-to-end landed costs, so that being a big part of our sourcing strategy. so that the supply chain is geared towards our business, geared towards our volumes, and geared towards our customer promise.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, I know you said that kind of the formal S&OP process. You're still very much working on it, but it is there to break down some of those silos. Is there an example from this year where you thought, this could have really been more of a crisis year? I have to emphasize the more, because everyone's been going through that crisis, but you've really handled that very much more smoothly than you anticipated, just because you were able to demonstrate that new resilience through gaining visibility from S&OP.
In very rudimentary terms, Emily, it's the fact that we're sitting together and staring at the pipeline end to end of the vehicles and dealer stock levels, and what I call DS2, which is probably from my old Nissan days, of how many days of stock you've got in the dealers by model, by market versus the Ford retail plan. The fact that we're looking at all these things in advance means, at least with the CEO, the CFO, the COO, and the sort of leaders like myself in finance, sales, and supply chain and operations, at least we're staring at that now on a regular basis, and we are projecting scenarios and creating decisions that are based on facts and data. And I think it really is as simple as that for Aston, that without that, I think we would have reacted later and potentially had to have made a bigger adjustment to our plans and our volumes than we've done. So we've made some significant changes, but I think in previous years, it would have been probably a few months down the line before we would have reacted. And by that point, the network really would have been in a challenging state if we'd continued to build cars and not reacted to that. Let's say the adjustment to the sales in the US, or even the fact that when all the tariff announcements happened, we reacted fast. We put in a bonded warehouse. We stopped shipping cars to the US until we got more clarity on what the rules were going to be. We looked at price elasticity and how much it would change the volumes. And we were doing it as a collective cross-functional discussion with the CEO in real time. So that's been the big step forward for us. And maybe in a way, being a smaller company in automotive OEM context, we don't need the big global processes and tools, because we can just get around a table. So don't get me wrong, I think if we can get the digital tools and the AI agents in place in the future, we'll be able to do real-time scenario planning, and that'll be even better. But at least it's got us around the table, and we've got a platform of data that's made us more proactive.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I actually wanted to touch on a little bit more widely on, you mentioned there on using AI for scenario planning and predictive analytics, perhaps. But how, what is kind of like now your roadmap? There's been so much change from when you initially shared to us in 9 months ago. Of you mentioned maybe exploring ideas like a digital control tower, and having closer partnerships with logistics providers to help those smaller flows. Because you've been very transparent about some of those really unique logistics realities for you, being a low volume and high value manufacturer, and what that means for your supply chain. So what does that kind of roadmap now look like for your digital transformation 9 months on from when you shared with us on the red sofa?
Yeah, good question. I think there's one area we've made great progress on, and there's another area I would love to make progress on, and we've got to convince the business to go for it. But the one we have made progress on is actually let's call it an LLP solution. So we actually have a long-term third-party logistics provider who basically has a contract that is from the part supplier to our line side. So it's an end-to-end 3PL, borderline 4PL contract in logistics terms. And they're our exclusive partner. And they've set up a management business model, which ultimately we have specific people doing all of our transport planning. But this company, I suppose I can mention it because it's in the public domain, it's DHL. DHL actually have an LLP solution which utilizes excuse me, I had a cold when I was on the red sofa, and I've got one now, so that's a nice
it's
coincidence.
it's obviously a trend.
Sorry
We're
about that.
talking about trends.
Yeah, so yeah, it must be exactly spring and autumn. No, so we've had a bespoke management team running the Aston Martin contract, and actually DHL have a digital LLP solution, which obviously maximizes their full collection network and allows them to do real-time transport planning with our live demand and optimize combinations of flows and groupage of deliveries and collections. And if you think about Aston, excuse me, I'll take a sip of water.
Yeah, do please.
We almost have a very inverse or flipped business model compared to high volume OEMs that I've worked for previously. We have something like 650 collection points for inbound logistics. Only 22 of them warrant what we would call an FTL or a full truckload style flow. So a point-to-point flow in terms of volume. All the rest, our volume is so small, and most of it's in, you could argue, standard packaging, that it's being grouped with other carriers anyway. But actually, this is something where this LLP solution with DHL that should continue for the rest of our contract with them, that will do that real-time planning and really pick up those 1-2 boxes a week that we need of something and layer it in with much better planning with collected loads where we can get a better rate. So that's one thing that's happening, which probably long overdue. And you could argue, if we've had a long-term contract with DHL, why didn't we do it sooner? But
I think that's
discussion.
that's the story of this year. Why didn't we do a lot of things sooner? So that what comes with what I said before. Some of the positives is that some people have been saying that we have been planning.
Totally, Emily. And now I'm a big believer that I think for the big OEMs, and I'm not telling them how to do their business, but they have the scale and the control to, I think, have that in-house control tower network design tool, and then work in partnership with different transport providers to optimize. Let's say if we go in Europe, an Iberian cluster of collections, or in America, it could be, I guess, be a Central American cluster, whatever it is. For us, it makes sense. We've got an exclusivity agreement with DHL. Us investing in it when they have the capability and something off the shelf at the moment doesn't make sense. But I'm a big believer that logistics network design solution, real-time data, real-time tracking of goods and flows, optimizing costs is a must. So that's something I think is a given. And I think a lot of the other OEMs, when I've attended the Automotive Logistics conferences, are quite well on the way with versions of this solution, which is really good to see. Then the second digital tool that I'm desperate to get, but we need to really win the hearts and minds in the business to spend the money on it. And I think the business case pays for itself very fast, is let's call it integrated business planning solution. So that sort of planning tool where it maps out your demand into a production plan, into a distribution plan. And, there's different layers of granularity you can put into that. So it can help do the day job more efficiently, but more importantly, I think it can help do business planning and actually calculate revenue, cash flows, and profit. So I think that the plan we need to do is really persuade the CFO that the payback on this is very fast, and the amount of cost you would pay for the license is probably 4 or 5 cars in the wrong place at the end of the year that we've ended up building as a stock car that you have to incentivize. And I think if we can look at it in that context and create a really powerful business case, that's something that, again, would transform the business and would be something that the S&OP process would sit inside as well as a planning solution.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, that's a very good wrap up of some of kind of the digital aspects of where we could definitely pivot as an industry going into 2026 as well as just kind of looking at it as the lessons learned. But I also want to touch on an aspect. It's not a headline topic of the live stream agenda, but resilience, adaptability, and navigating uncertainty ultimately comes down to the people as well, and having a strong team. I know when we spoke in March at our event in Europe in Bonn, you were talking about the talent, the skill, and the training, and how important that is. So kind of with that in mind, what have you learned about kind of leading teams through such an intense pressure and continuous change this year?
It's a fantastic question, and I would say working in a smaller OEM, it's much harder to be a good leader, and I'll qualify what I mean by that. I think you have to spend far more of your time with your sleeves rolled up, doing the job and helping to do the job and running the business than you do when if I compare this to when I was working in Volvo Cars, I was like a corporate leader, a corporate vice president, and I had a lot of team and structure and resource at my disposal. So in a way, you have to try even harder to spend time to help develop the team.
Mm-hmm.
But in the way you're sort of up to your eyes in the problem with them and living and breathing it with them. And I think it's far more coaching and mentoring and living the day job with the team and bringing them with you. And I think that's more important. And then I reflect on, okay, you can set a strategic direction, but in a way you have to be more able to work in ambiguity and volatility, because again, in a smaller OEM, that ability to move with the challenges and then sometimes change your priorities, is much more important, because you're not able to have the structures to carry on the same path. And the structures and the resources in a big OEM mean that when the crises hit, there's almost a structure there ready to deal with it. And I'm not saying it's not difficult, whereas here, it's then, okay, which plate do I keep spinning at what pace? Or sometimes which plate do we allow to drop? So when it comes to the people, I think even the people in our team are working in a much more fluid way of learning the job and actually being very, I'd say, resilient themselves to actually move from task to task and change their own priorities and touch lots of things. So I suppose my last point on that in terms of leadership, in the previous organizations I've worked for, you'd have a nice career path of people, move them around all the different areas of supply chain. They can work in inbound logistics, outbound logistics, planning, aftermarket, you name it. And once they've done all of that over a period of time, they've got a nice rounded profile in end-to-end supply chain. But here, I think we're often using our people in a very proactive way on a constant basis. And somebody might be doing one type of role one week, and then we pull them to do something else the next week because there's quite an urgent task. So yeah, it's a different style of leadership. And I think making people, but the fundamentals are the same. I think making your team know that they are in a place of psychological safety. Everybody makes mistakes, but ultimately we're all pulling in the same direction. We succeed together, we fail together. And as long as everybody's acting with integrity and the best intentions with the tools at their disposal, then we succeed and fail together, and nobody's going to be thrown under a bus or blamed for that. So it's really a very different style of leadership to being the corporate leader of a big supply chain function in one of the big OEMs.
No, but I appreciate the transparency on that. And I think it's a really nice sentiment to also share with the industry, that when you're going through so much change, that it's okay to fail and learn from it, because that's definitely what this year has been. We will have Martin with us in person, I'm glad to say, at our Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain Conference in Europe, in Bonn, which is in March again. And so please do make sure that you catch him there if you're going to be with us and hear more about Aston Martin's ongoing transformation. And we hope to see you there and continue this discussion as well, Martin. But thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Emily.